Hello, today we're going to talk about Chapter 11. Chapter 11 deals with advertising and commercial culture. It's in Section 4 of your book, or Part 4, which is the business of mass media. Our objectives and essential questions are: how do advertisers appeal to consumers in placement and content of ads? And how has this changed throughout history? So in Chapter 11, we're going to learn about this question. Our objective after this chapter will be able to identify advertising tactics and apply concepts to understanding those tactics when I see advertisements around me. So basically, out of this chapter, I want you to become a more informed consumer and understand how advertisers are placing their ads and using their ads to try to get you and other consumers to purchase their products. Of course, you'll want to pause the video so you can write your objectives and essential questions down. The opening story is about the rise of mobile advertising. In 2012, Google introduced its latest device, Google Glass. It has not been determined if Google Glass will succeed. It has, however, redefined ways that advertisers can track users and further personalize advertising. So one of the quotes on the bottom of page 382 says, "When you put a pair of these glasses on, your gaze may be revealing more about you than you may realize, and advertisers will soon pay a hefty premium to gain access to your eyes." So then if you put the glasses on, you would see the advertisements right in your face, right at your eyeball level. So please read that interesting opening story, which could make for an interesting case study when you're doing your case study project. This is part 1, by the way, which is going to cover pages 381 to 387. Early developments in advertising. Advertising has existed since 3000 BC. When shop owners hung signs outside of their shops in ancient Babylon. The first advertising agencies were newspaper space brokers. So space brokers, and they purchased space in newspapers and sold it to various merchants. Information about this can be found on page 384 to 385. It further says on page 385, regarding space brokers, newspapers accustomed to 25% non-payment rate from advertisers welcomed the space brokers who paid up front. Brokers usually received discounts of 15 to 30%, but sold the space to advertisers at the going rate. Alright, then we're going to talk more about this, Volney Palmer. He opened a prototype of the first ad agency in Boston, and it was a 25% commission from newspaper publishers. He sold space to advertisers then. In the late 1800s, N.W. Ayer & Son was the first modern ad agency. They helped to create, write, and produce, and then also place ads in selected newspapers and magazines. This is found on page 385 to 386. It opened in 1869 in Philadelphia, and the agency had the traditional payment structure, was collecting a fee from its advertising client for each ad paid. The fee covered the price that each media outlet charged for placement in the ad, plus the 15% commission for the agency. And the more ads that an agency placed, the larger the agency's revenues were. As a result, agencies had little incentive to buy fewer ads on behalf of their clients. Today, however, advertising agencies work for a flat fee, and some will agree to be paid on a performance basis. So if your ad actually sells things, then they make more money. So they're paid on a percentage of the performance. Trademarks and packaging begins on page 386. This came out of manufacturers realizing that if their products looked distinctive and became associated with quality, people would ask for them by name. So obviously if you have a good quality product and people associate your product with quality, it's going to have a better selling capability. So this is kind of that word of mouth form of advertising, which often, as we've probably heard and we've talked about, is word of mouth is sometimes the best form of advertising. To continue advertising in the 1800s, the next thing that is listed on page 386 is patent medicines and the department store. By the end of the 1800s, patent medicines and department stores accounted for half of the revenues taken in by ad agencies. And as you can imagine, advertising had a very big impact on newspapers, which is on page 387. The demand for advertising in newspapers significantly changed the copy to ad ratio. And in the mid-1880s, newspapers were 70 to 75% news and 25 to 30% ads. And then later, by the early 1900s, more than half of the news in the newspaper was ads. However, in the recent recession, which began in 2008, when this hit, the newspaper industry was hit hard. And ad revenue has dropped by 44% since 2005, which is kind of where we talk about black and white and dead all over. It relates to that. We're just going to do a little bit more today for part 1, finish up page 387, which on the bottom of page 387, it says promoting social change and dictating values. And when we talk about this, we're talking about advertising and how it has significantly influenced the switch from a producer-directed to a consumer-driven society. Promoted technical advances, and it encouraged economic growth. Sorry, I guess I kind of talked about stuff and didn't advance the slide. So this is back when I was talking about the patents. Patent medicines and department stores. You probably want to pause it to listen to some of this. So I'll repeat what I said. By the end of the 1800s, patent medicines and department stores were accounting for half of the revenues by ad agencies, and this is on page 386. Many contemporary products, this is very interesting, this is on page 387. Many contemporary products began as medicinal ads. Coca-Cola, for instance, was initially sold as a medicinal tonic. And of course, we all know that it contained traces of cocaine until 1903, when cocaine was replaced by caffeine. In the early days, Post and Kellogg's cereal ads promised to cure stomach and digestive problems. And many medicines made outrageous claims about what they could cure, leading to increased public cynicism. Advertisers began to police their ranks and develop industry codes to restore customer confidence in these medicinal ads, which was to monitor the claims. And then the Food and Drug Act was passed in 1906. And then I also kind of went through this too fast. I'm sorry about that. Department stores. Department stores comprised more than 20% of the ad space by early 1890s, excuse me, and these were criticized for undermining the small businesses. Obviously, advertising has a significant impact on newspapers. 70 to 75% in the 1800s was news, and 25 to 30% were ads. But by the 1900s, over half of the space in the newspaper was ads. But again, in 2008, when the recession hit newspapers hard, this began to decline, and ad revenues dropped by 44% since 2005. So this is where we're at, promoting social change and dictating values on page 387. Advertising significantly influenced the switch from a producer-directed to a consumer-driven society, promoted technical advances, and encouraged economic growth. And then the next part will start on page 388, which will be part 2 of the notes.